I'm Matthew Best. I'm the director of Future of Hope here. It's hosted by Johnson University, and we're so glad you came to spend tonight with us. We're thankful for those that came back for night number 2. At this time, we're going to get started with a little bit of worship, and then we're going to jump straight into one of our 2 dynamic presenters and speakers that we have for you tonight. So without further ado, I want to present a friend of mine. He goes by the name of Jay Blake White. We went to high school together. He's now out in LA, leading worship, doing music, doing all kinds of stuff, and just an all-around awesome guy. So I will step out of the way so that we can hear from him and enjoy this worship. So please enjoy.
Come on, let's sing to our Father today. Let's sing it. Yeah. Hallelujah. Yes, God. Ooh. Sing majesty. Majesty. How I worship. How I worship. Sing majesty. Majesty. How I bless you. How I bless you. For you alone are worthy, God. For you alone. You are worthy of the praise. Are worthy of my praise. Sing majesty. How I worship you, Jesus. How I worship. Sing majesty. Majesty. How I bless your name. For you alone. For you alone. You are worthy of the praise. And sing, you are worthy. You are worthy of my praise. Come on, lift your voice and sing together. You are worthy of my praise. Oh, Jesus, because you're so good, I've got to give you praise. I've got to give you honor. Jesus, oh, see, you are worthy. You are worthy of. Yes, God. See, you are worthy, yeah. Not just for what you've done, but for who you are, Father. You're so worthy. 10,000 tongues wouldn't be enough to give you glory, to give you honor. Oh, you're so worthy, Jesus, of my praise. Come on, let's take it up again. Say, you are worthy. Oh, you're so worthy, Jesus. You should feel comfortable by now. You ought to sing it from your heart. Say, you are worthy of my praise. Oh, yeah, you are worthy. Yeah, yeah, my praise. Hallelujah, hallelujah, Jesus. We give you the highest praise, Jesus. You worthy God, you worthy God, we give you the praise. Yes, God. Yes, Jesus. Yes. Our hearts cry, be magnified in this your holy temple, in this your holy place, and we will rise praised and glorified, unified. Oh, how we love you. Oh, how we praise you. Oh, how we worship. Oh, Lord. Oh, how we love you, yeah. Oh, how we praise you. Oh, how we worship. Oh, Lord. Come on, let's sing. Be magnified in this your holy place. In this your holy place. And we will rise to Zion's heights. Yes, Lord, to praise and glorify. Unified. Come on, let's sing together. Sing, oh, how we worship you. Oh, how we love you. Oh, how we worship you, Jesus. Oh, Lord. Come on, let's sing. Say, oh, how we love you. Oh, Jesus, we give you the glory. Lord, we give your name the praise. Oh, Lord. Let's take it up, say. Oh, how we love you. Lord, there's no one beside you. Oh, we worship you, we worship you. Say, oh, how we love your name. We love your sweet holy name. We give you glory and praise. Oh, there's no one like you in all the earth. Come on, let's sing. Let's go up, say yes. Oh, how we love you, Jesus. Oh, how we praise your name, Jesus. We give you glory. We give you honor. Yeah. Oh, how we love you. There's no one like you in all the earth. No one like you, Jesus. Oh, how we worship you. We adore your name. We extol you. Come on, let's take it up again. Say, hey. Oh, how we love you. Oh, how we praise you. Oh, we worship you. We worship you. We magnify you. We lift your name high, higher than any other name, Jesus. Oh, how we love you. We praise you. We bless your name. Oh, say, oh, Lord. Say, oh, how we love your name. Oh, we give you the glory. We bless you. We honor you, Jesus. We honor you, Jesus. We bow in your presence. We bow in your presence. There's no one like you. There's no one like you. Yeah. Oh, how we praise you. Yeah. Oh, we worship you, Jesus. Oh, how we love you. Oh, how we love your name. Oh, how we praise your name, Jesus. My soul longs to praise you. My will is to praise you. Oh, I was made to worship you, Jesus. I was made to give you praise. I was made to give you worship. I was made to bless your name. Yeah, yeah. Oh, Lord. Oh, how we love you, Jesus. Oh, yeah, yeah, yes. Yes, Jesus.
Ann, are you on here for me? Can you introduce Dr. Trulear for us?
Yes.
Um, Dr. Harold Dean Trulear is an ordained American Baptist minister and serves as an associate professor of applied theology at Howard University. Dr. Trulear is on the pastoral staff of Praise and Glory Tabernacle in the Southwest Philadelphia and also served as a fellow at the Center of Public Justice in Washington, D.C. He has taught religion, public policy, and community studies in several institutions, including Yale University, the University of Southern California, Harvard Seminary, Eastern University, and Vanderbilt University. He co-edited Minister with Prisoners and Their Families, The Way Forward with W. Wilson Good and Charles E. Lewis. His writing on religion, culture, and politics affairs have appeared in a wide variety of publications, including PBS Religion and Ethics Newsweekly at the Center of Public Justice Capitol Commentary.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Best, for this invitation, and to everyone participating in the Faith and Justice Summit. It's a privilege to be with you today, and I'm especially grateful for Matthew Best, who I've watched from a distance and known for a few months, said modestly, and just congratulate you on the work you're doing down there at Johnson University. So what I want to do tonight is present a model for congregations engaging in criminal justice ministry and policy reform. And it's the Healing Communities model that was developed at the Annie E. Casey Foundation when I was working there in 2008. And how are we doing? Okay. It's called the Healing Communities model. I'll say some more things about that later, but I want to start with a family story. This is the Walker family. Walker family is from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Their zip code is 53208. And the reason I mention the zip code is that is the zip code with the highest percentage of incarcerated persons in America. 62% of Black males in Milwaukee, 53206, rather, I'm sorry, I said 8. 62% of all males, African-American males in that zip code go to state prison. Not jail, not get arrested, not federal prison, state prison, 62%. That is not a typo. That number comes from the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee. And in the center of the picture is Beverly Walker, and she's holding a picture of her husband, Barron. Beverly's very active in her church, and when she went to her church and told them that Barron was incarcerated, they told her, well, you're still a young woman, you're still nice looking, you should probably go find someone else. And she said to them, well, didn't you tell us till death do us part? And they said, well, yeah, but this is different. You shouldn't have to wait 40 years for your husband to come home from prison. You go marry somebody else. So she left that church, joined another church that had a very active prison ministry. And she said, my name is Beverly Walker. My husband, Barron, is incarcerated at Fox Lake Prison, upstate Wisconsin, and I'd like some help and support for my family. And the church said, well, we have a prison ministry, but we don't go to Fox Lake Prison. Isn't that interesting? Most of our prison ministries are institution specific. They're not person specific. I'll come back to that. She finally went to a group of churches that were willing to work with her to help take care of her and also bring her husband Barron home. What Beverly suffered from is what we call disenfranchised grief. Disenfranchised grief is a sense of loss that is not validated or credited by the community. You can compare it to a franchise grief, which is a sense of loss where we build support and rituals. Death, for example. When a person dies, we have funerals, we have wakes, we have viewings, we have all kinds of rituals of support to acknowledge the loss and the grief that an individual experiences when they've lost their lives. However, when a person loses a loved one to the criminal justice system, their grief is not credited, their grief is not recognized. We call it disenfranchised grief. And that's what Beverly was suffering with. He was also in need of justice because Barron's sentence of 40 years was originally eligible for parole after 16 years. But in 1998, the state of Wisconsin changed the laws to what they call truth in sentencing, which was based on the Clinton crime bill co-authored and co-sponsored by our current president. He's not always been on the right side of things, in my judgment, which made mandatory minimum sentencing a rewarded by federal dollars if states took on mandatory minimums and eliminated discretionary parole. They were given federal dollars to build more prisons. So Barron, rather than spending 16 years and being eligible for parole, now, because of truth in sentencing, was going to be facing 40 years. Thankfully, Beverly and the churches she worked with were able to take his case all the way to the Supreme Court, where it was ruled that changing the mandatory minimum for people who had already been sentenced was unconstitutional, ex post facto. So Barron was released, and that's a picture of me standing with Beverly and Barron at the Congressional Black Caucus several years ago after Barron was granted his release. Also, in the other picture that you see with me is with a woman named Yvette Clausen, who was sentenced to life without parole as a teenager for the murder of a man who was abusing her. Her sentence was overturned after Brian Stevenson, whose character was played by Michael B. Jordan in the movie Just Mercy. Brian Stevenson went to the United States Supreme Court and got the court to rule that sentencing an adolescent to life without parole was unconstitutional because it was a violation of the Eighth Amendment for cruel and unusual punishment. And so after 29 years in prison, Yvette was released. And I'm telling these stories for a particular reason. Sociologist C. Wright Mills argued that every public issue is the amalgam of personal trials. And if we're going to get congregations involved in this kind of work, in criminal justice reform, then what we need are the stories of people like Barron and Beverly Walker, of people like Yvette Clausen, who's standing there with me, and her pastor, at the time, Reverend Lee Rorted Schott, who's the pastor of Women at the Well United Methodist Church, which is actually located inside the Iowa Women's Prison. There are several states where the women's prison actually has a church on the inside. And by the way, you're in one of them. Tennessee Women's Prison has a United Methodist Church inside the prison. And it's a full member of the Tennessee Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. I think it's called Grace Place, United Methodist Church inside the Tennessee Women's Prison. The prison in the church in the Iowa Women's Prison is called Women at the Well United Methodist Church. Beverly was a member there, and Pastor Lee is standing with me in this picture. And it's knowing their stories, knowing what they've come through, knowing how the system has been stacked unfairly against them systematically, right, policy-wise, that can mobilize us as people of faith to get involved in criminal justice reform. And so we developed this model called the Healing Communities model, the Healing Communities vision, where we help congregations in the healing and restoration of individuals impacted by incarceration by treating what we say the prison or the jail the same manner as the hospital. In other words, in Matthew 25, Jesus says we visit the sick. He says we visit the prisoner. Every church visits the sick. They visit the sick from their own church. Their sick ministry is not confined to one hospital. However, when we minister at prisons and jails, we tend to be confined to one hospital. What if we were to start with, this is the second point, our own members who have someone who's in the criminal justice system? Because we have 2.2 million Americans currently behind bars, and because we have 9 million Americans who are currently under some form of criminal justice supervision, whether it's in prison, probation, parole, house arrest, alternative programming, halfway houses, etc., it is virtually impossible that your church does not have a family that is impacted by mass incarceration. One of the things that I do when I go preach in various churches is I give an altar call for families of the incarcerated. And in 14 years, I've never had an empty altar. I've had as many as 400 people come forward at a mega church, and the smallest number we had was 9, and that was in a church that only had 12 people there. And so you have in your congregation families that are impacted by mass incarceration. It's virtually mathematically impossible with 9 million Americans currently under criminal justice supervision for your church not to have a family that has someone in prison, in jail, probation, parole, etc. In so doing, we create space for reconciliation because by crediting their grief and wrapping our arms around the family members that come to our congregations week after week, we provide a sense of solace for them, and we can lay the groundwork for reconciliation with family members, many of whom have disappointed their own families through their criminal behavior or criminalized behaviors. And then it also develops what we call the service to advocacy pipeline. Congregations are mobilized around public issues when they know the individuals who are facing the personal trial. The things we know about mobilizing congregations around social justice is that they are best mobilized when you put a face on the issue. Think of the civil rights movement. The face was Rosa Parks. 1/3 of Martin Luther King's initial speech beginning the Montgomery bus boycott was about Mrs. Parks. The other 2/3 were about the justice issues. Congregations mobilize around faces, not facts. They mobilize around names, not numbers. They mobilize around stories, not statistics. There's my Baptist alliteration for the night. Okay? They are mobilized by the stories, faces, and names of those who are impacted. And for us, the starting point are the mothers and fathers and children of incarcerated individuals who come to our congregations week after week. We're able to offer them hope and healing because of this sense of loss. If you look at the picture on the left, that's me preaching at a church in New Jersey. I've just given the altar call for families of the incarcerated. And if you can tell, if you look closely, the entire front of the church is full and the numbers spill back into the aisles. And whenever I look at this picture, I think about the little baby with the pacifier who's center front, being held by the woman in the blue jacket. That child is already impacted by mass incarceration, even though she probably can't spell it yet. So this is an issue that faces all of us and faces all of our congregations. What we do when we train a congregation in this work is we tell them what we're talking about is not prison ministry, it's healing communities. Because the person who is incarcerated needs ministry, the family members who are left home need ministry, children of the incarcerated need ministry, people who have been victimized by criminalized behavior need ministry. And so it's all of our issue, not just the province of a particular prison ministry or jail ministry within the congregation. Many of our congregations take on the designation of a station of hope. And so that in relationship with the criminal justice system, judges and probation officers and parole officers that work along with our congregations know which churches have been trained to receive men and women who are coming back from incarceration. We use the term returning citizens rather than ex-offender because it looks forward. Jesus looks at Peter and says, "You are Peter. You will be called a rock," right? He doesn't look back on Peter and judge him based on his past. He looks forward. And so we believe that nobody should be defined by the mistakes they have made. So we don't use ex-offender because it still defines the person as an offender. We don't use ex-felon, ex-con, any X's. How would you like it if you were always introduced as an ex, whatever the worst thing is you ever did? It's simply not Christian, in my judgment, to identify people other than by our theological anthropology, which means we are all created in the image of God. And so we use the term returning citizen as a theological construct to stress where a person is headed as opposed to defining them by their past. We also use the term youth justice rather than juvenile justice because the word juvenile has similar connotations. I have a couple minutes left, and so I just want to share some basic principles of what we do when we're training congregations. We want them to create a climate of welcome and inclusion. Making sure that people who are coming home from prison, as well as the family members left behind, feel welcome and included and are not stigmatized or shamed. I had a student say to me once that she couldn't work with prisoners and she couldn't work with those kinds of people because they're bad people. And I said, well, if you don't like those people, then we have to change some things in the Bible. She said, why do you say that? I said, because those people are all in the Bible. If you don't you don't like those people, you got to get rid of the book of Genesis because Joseph went to prison. If you don't like those people, you got to get rid of the book of Jeremiah because he was in solitary confinement. If you don't like those people, you got to get rid of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego because they were on death row. If you don't like those people, you got to get rid of Daniel because he was a two-time loser. If you don't like those people, you got to get rid of the book of Revelation because John was locked up when he wrote that. If you don't like those people, you got to get rid of 1st and 2nd Peter. Because Peter went to prison, the church prayed for him, but when he came home, they wouldn't let him in, so things really haven't changed that much. If you don't like those people, then stop telling people, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, because it was written by an inmate. If you don't like those people, you're really in the wrong religion because Jesus died in custody. Now, some people might say, well, they were all in prison for righteousness' sake, but Moses was a killer, David conspired to commit murder, and Paul was an accessory when he held the coats when he killed Stephen. So we tell those stories from Scripture to make sure that we understand that God does not judge us based on a criminalized behavior, but God judges us through the eyes of Christ, and He's created all of us in His image. And so we finally organized congregations or as communities of advocacy. We link them up with social justice movements to get policy reform and policy change. One thing that we were able to do with our Pennsylvania churches, in partnership with several social justice organizations, we were able to clear the books of a number of jobs that had been withheld from people with felony convictions. And we're very, very proud that we were part of that movement. In Florida, we worked along with returning citizens there to help secure the right to vote for people with felony convictions at the 2019 election. So I'll stop there, and I'm talking fast because I want to make sure I keep under time. I want to thank, again, Dr. Betts for this invitation, and I look forward to the Q&A that we'll be having in a little while.
Thanks so much, Dr. Trulear. Yeah, I don't even have words for all that the knowledge you dropped on there. And you snuck in a sermon, which is what I wanted you to do, so I appreciate that. You got to be you at all times, Dr. Trulear. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Now, Jordan, I'm sorry I messed you up the first time. Jordan, if you would introduce our next presenter, and then let's jump into this Q&A after that. So yeah, Jordan, you're up now.
Dr. Michelle Clifton-Soderstrom is Dean of Faculty and Professor of Theology and Ethics at North Park Theological Seminary. She also directs the School of Restorative Arts, which is North Park's MA degree in Restorative Justice Ministry offered in prison. Dr. Clifton-Soderstrom is a passionate advocate for people and groups who are marginalized in society and the church. Her interests include virtue ethics, Christology, children and women's participation, family ethics, and education for persons who are incarcerated. Ordained to word and sacrament in the Evangelical Covenant Church, Dr. Clifton-Soderstrom serves as an advisor to the denomination's Christian Action Committee and sits on the editorial board for the Journal of the Society of Christian Ethics.
Thank you so much, Jordan. I really appreciate that warm welcome. And Dr. Trulear, it is truly an honor to tag team with you. And Elder Matthew, I know it's not Sunday, but I got to give you a title. You're doing amazing work, as Dr. Trulear said, and I'm just so happy to be with young people who are passionate about the kingdom of God. So I will jump right in and add one thing that was not in my introduction, and that is that I am also a prison abolitionist. I'm a prison abolitionist because the system, if you were here last night and heard Reverend Dominique talk, is not only flawed, it is fundamentally, it's sinful, it's unjust, it's evil even, because it was never set up to be transformative or restorative. And so that's why I call myself an abolitionist. And as you know, if you heard last night, there are roots of the system that date way back to slavery. So I feel that that's my calling as a Christian. It's my hope that the church can actually do that. So how do I live this out? I'd like to talk a little bit about that, and I'm going to show you some slides. As Jordan said, I am an educator in prison. I've been teaching in prison for 5 years now. I'm a Christian social ethicist, and so I've been teaching about justice for 15 years, and I got tired of just teaching about justice and wanted education to be just and the gospel to have feet and legs in our city in Chicago. So this is Stateville Correctional Center, where we run our School of Restorative Arts. This was one of our first weeks that we were doing classes. We had a handful of students taking courses inside. Stateville Correctional Center is a maximum security prison, one of 3 in the state of Illinois. It houses 1,200 men who are disproportionately African American or Black and Latino, and this is also true of our students. And as I said, we've been in there for 5 years, and for 2 years we've been running a degree program in restorative justice ministries. When we started doing classes there, the students loved the courses so much that they asked us to turn it into a whole degree, and they've had input in what we do, and it's been truly transformative. The other beautiful thing about the program is that we have outside or free students who take courses alongside the men who are incarcerated. And praise God and hope, please pray that we open up in the women's prison either this spring or next fall. COVID has set us back a little bit. But what I have found by being in prison is who we lock up. So I'll show this picture first. This was our first class, and it wasn't a degree program then. As you can see, there's a handful of students, outside and inside students, that are in this photo. This is the photo actually last year. We now have, this is about half of our students. We have 70 degree seeking students, men who are getting their master's degree in ministry at Stateville Correctional Center. So this is a picture of how it grew. And one of the things I've learned in there is who we lock up in this country. Dr. Trulear named Matthew 25. So think about that as you're seeing who we lock up, right? Disproportionately people of color. People who are incarcerated are often unemployed or underemployed at the time of arrest. Many people in prison are mentally ill. They come from low-income families and economically distressed neighborhoods. They are the least educated among us. They are poor, and many have English as a second language. So that's what I found when I went into prison. I also found when I went into prison men like this. This is Mr. Parham. He goes by Smiley. He's our first and hopefully one of many students who was released a year ago. He is now studying on our campus in Chicago. We have housing for him, and he just got married to the mother of his children, and he's finishing his degree. And he is just one example of the many amazing men. Dr. Trulear said, we need to know the stories and the people, and that's going to be my message today too, is that this is the first step and the most powerful, important step of what the church can be doing, or in the words of Dominique, how we can be a different kind of community. I'm going to actually show you also a video of 3 of our students so you can meet them and hear a tiny bit about their stories yourself. And hopefully the sound will work on this. No sound.
Dr. Michelle, when you share your video, so if you click out of sharing your screen, when you get ready to share again, click on share audio before you click the video you want to show.
Okay, so stop sharing?
Yep, stop sharing. So now when you go to share again, at the bottom of the little window, there should be a share audio, share computer audio. Click on that and then click the video you want to share.
Okay. Let's wait. Oh yeah.
Yep.
Great. Thank you, Matthew. Is it working now?
You may want to start it back over, and then just make sure that the volume on your player and on your computer is where you want it to be.
Yeah, I don't think it's working. I won't belabor that then. I can send a link to this at some point if you want to see it. It's a 7-minute video, but basically what you see in this is the stories of 3 men who are in our program, and they talk about their own sense of learning to become agents of restoration in their prison context, and when they get out, what they want to do with their degree is just be the church in the world, and to break down barriers like prison, like the criminal justice system, that are really anti-gospel. So the first step then in the church's call to be a different community is simply to pursue the radical humanity, the image of God in the people behind bars. And you can do that through stories, through watching documentaries of real people inside. You can do it by letter writing, and you can do it by actually going inside the prison and visiting people and getting to know people. The world has literally rendered our incarcerated population invisible, and we need to see as Christians and hear their stories. I think that one of the things, the most powerful things in my own going in is not simply that I'm bringing something in, or I'm bringing ministry or even hospitality and presence, but also there's two other amazing things that I want to share with you before I close about what happens when prison. First, you will view the gospel differently when you go in prison. The Holy Spirit will go to work, and texts like Matthew 25 will come alive. So I want to actually share with you one way that that happened with me. As I said, I'm a Christian ethicist, and I use Matthew 25 all the time. It's the seminal text for us to use, and it's the story when Jesus comes and he gathers the nations together, and he puts the sheep on the one hand and the goat on the other hand, and then he says, "The king will say to those at his right hand, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom that was prepared for you from the foundation of the world.'" And I've got this text up here. "For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. A stranger and you welcomed me. Naked and you gave me clothing. Sick and you took care of me. In prison and you visited me." And then the righteous answered, "Lord, when was it we saw you hungry and thirsty and naked and a stranger?" And he said to those, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these, you have done so to me." I have this text up because it's really easy to skip over verse 34. It's actually kind of boring in light of the rest of the verses, but this verse really captures, I think, the kernel of the gospel, because it is inviting we who are blessed to enter the world of ministry, the world of family by way of inheritance. Jesus doesn't say, rule number 1, you need to feed the hungry. Rule number 2, you need to visit those who are sick. Do these things and then you will be saved. People in this text is what I've learned by going into prison are not a means to an end. They are our inheritance. And I think this is a really important word. I've spent a lot of time, as I said, in prison over the last 4 years, in part because of this text. And what I've learned is that the bodies we lock up in this country are Matthew 25 people. I would even go so far as to say we have locked up the king's inheritance. And this is a really important reminder, I think, for us to not fall into the trap of thinking that what I'm doing or what we're doing when we go into prison is simply charity, rather than a participation in the king's inheritance. And this is the heart of the gospel, right? So I'm just going to preach for a second. I'm an evangelical. I love the Bible. I love Jesus. And I just want to remind us that Jesus loved us so much that he took on a human body. He became human in every way. He walked with sinners, cheaters, liars, murderers, prostitutes, thieves, people who didn't get caught for their sins and people who did get caught for their sins. He was patient when he spoke to the powerful religious leaders. He identified so closely with the hungry, thirsty, naked immigrant, sick, and prisoner that he not only called them members of his family, he said, "They are me." And then Jesus became the worst of humanity, a death row prisoner. He submitted to being crucified on a cross, even though he knew no sin, and he died. This, however, is not the end of the story, because Jesus is God, and all God knows is the kind of community who lives in mutual love, who never has to justify skin color, income bracket, physical health, mental ability, or citizenship. And because we can't keep a community like that down, Jesus was raised after only 3 days, not just in spirit, but in body, because bodies matter to God. And so this, my friends, is the second and final reality that I will share with you about what happens when we pursue humanity, the bodies who are inside prison. They become part of you. They become part of your community. Their voices are in your head, and those who are most affected by the system of mass incarceration will lead you and us to the creative, spirit-led work of abolishing unjust systems. And so sometimes when people come to me, they say, Michelle, this system is huge. What can I do? It's overwhelming. We have arguably the worst criminal justice system in the world. We lock up the most people. How can we impact and interrupt this system of violence? I don't know where to start. And I always answer, start with the people. It's the heart of the gospel, the witness of the church. And you not only become a believer when we do this kind of ministry, but we become God's beloved agents of restoration. And so I'll stop there. I think the Q&A will be helpful, and happy to give more concrete ideas. But starting with the people, I think that's exactly what Dr. Trulear is calling us to do, and that is my hope, that in ways that the church can be a different kind of people.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Michelle. That was inspiring and just so helpful, and great to see two different approaches, one from our local church, but one from actually going inside institutions from an educational standpoint. So grateful. Just so grateful for those perspectives. And so now I'm going to ask for folks that have questions. We've actually, both of our presenters finished early. They went ahead, we gave them a schedule ahead of time. They both left some extra time. So I think, because they really want to hear your questions. So I'd love for folks to either use the raise hand feature, if you've got that on your reactions, or if you want to just raise your physical hand, or just turn your camera on and unmute yourself so that we can hear you ask your question. So I'd love for anybody that's got questions for either of our presenters. We'd love to start there. So who will be the first to start us? Everybody's being shy today. You guys have access to two of the most prominent people doing incredible work with trying to help serve our returning citizens, as well as our folks that are experiencing the criminal justice system. So we'd love to give you an opportunity. Any of my students on here that got questions, some of them got to have a Q&A with Dominique a couple weeks ago and asked some incredible questions. And so feel free to just jump in there and ask questions. There's no question there's no bad questions. I'll put it that way.
I would kind of like to hear from Dr. Michelle. I don't see your last name. I've never heard anybody talk about being, what did you say, a prison abolitionist? And I would love to hear kind of more about what that means to you. I'd love to hear more about that.
I can say two quick things about that. One, oftentimes people will say prison reform, and I mean, again, if you heard Dominique's talk last night, you know that the system was never set up to be rehabilitative, restorative, transformative. And so I think abolishing the system, which doesn't mean that there aren't people who need help, whether it be medical help, mental health assistance, some people who need to have, boundaries until they heal, or maybe for longer term. So it doesn't mean that we don't have facilities and places and institutions that are helping with that, but that the overall system, by and large, as we know it today, I don't see anything redemptive in it. And so what that means for me, to use the language of abolition, I think matches the history of mass incarceration in this country and the development from slavery to where we are now. And then secondly, for me as a white woman who works in a predominantly white institution, we really frame the work we're doing inside education is reparative justice, or a form of reparations that is giving back to a system that has unjustly treated, especially Black men and women in this country.
Thanks, Dr. Michelle. I'm going to jump to a question from Dave McNeely for Dr. Trulear. I think, what's a good step to reducing the stigma in some of our more affluent churches about talking out loud about the people in our families / churches who are incarcerated? I think Dave is speaking to the ways that a lot of times silence or kind of, we whisper about stuff, but we don't talk about, we know so-and-so's uncle is in prison, but we don't mention it and that kind of stuff. So what are some ways to reduce some of the stigma in churches around that, Dr. Trulear?
Sure. One of the things that we have on our website, and I'll type my website in momentarily, healingcommunitiesusa.com. On our resource page, we have a worship resource guide that is designed to give congregations tools that they can use during their regular Sunday morning worship. It's not a prison ministry worship guide. It has sermon ideas, Bible studies, litanies, public prayers that can be used during the regular Sunday morning worship to keep the issue in front of people, right? So that sermons like one sermon I think is called From Living Between Expectation and Experience on Philippians 4:13. It talks about I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, but it was written by a prisoner. Paul was incarcerated at the time. And so we have a number of sermon resources that can be used to preach and to prayers for prisoners, using the bulletin. Every church I know has a sick and shut-in list, and that's based on Matthew 25. So if the sick are on there, the prisoners, there should be a prisoners list. And so creating the culture, we have all these resources that we use. Now, I tell the story of all the Bible people when I preach, irrespective of what text I take, because I'm really working at the shame and stigma issue. And I can tell you that we've never had an empty altar doing the altar call, even in affluent churches. I spoke at a Christian college student conference, maybe 8 or 9 years ago. And it was all white kids, all white Christian kids. And I was trying to make the point that this is a problem for the affluent as well, and especially now that we have the opioid crisis. And when they were fighting the war on drugs in my neighborhood, it was the war on drugs. Now that it's in white neighborhood, it's the opioid crisis, right? And that's probably because Opie's getting high, right? Any rate, some of you aren't old enough to remember Opie, but any rate, I digress. So I get this guy, he raises his hand, and he says, well, Dr. Trulear, there's nobody like that in my church, so what can we do to help the Black church? I said, no, there's got to be somebody like that in your church. No. I said, well, what school do you go to? He said, I go to Georgetown University. I'm a law student there, and I go to Georgetown Presbyterian Church. And you can't make this stuff up. This was a Saturday. Sunday before, I taught Sunday school at Georgetown Presbyterian Church. His church, I was in his church the Sunday before. So I said, look, I was just at your church 6 days ago. You want names? I can give you names from your church. And so it's real. Here's what I'll let me land the plane. The pain of disenfranchised grief is so great that if you create the space where someone can safely disclose, like an altar call, I guarantee you people will respond. Sometimes it just takes one. We were at a suburban African-American church here in Virginia. I stay in Virginia. My church is in Virginia. And we were at a church down the road here in Northern Virginia, and nobody moved when we did the altar call. Then I saw this little boy sitting with what turned out to be his grandmother, and he pulled her down so he could whisper in her ear. And the next thing I know, he's leading this older woman up. He's leading his grandmother up. It turned out that when we did the altar call and nobody moved, this 5-year-old kid turned to his grandmother and said, isn't he talking about Daddy? And his grandmother said, yes. She said, and we should go up there, shouldn't we? And he led his grandmother up, and by the time they got to the front, another 20 people came forward. It gave new meaning to a little child shall lead them. So that 5-year-old brought 20 people to the altar. And I'm telling people, disenfranchised grief hurts. And if you give me the space, I will disclose if I know it's safe.
Thanks for that story. Thanks, Dr. Trulear.
Sure.
We got another question in the chat here for Dr. Michelle. I think she's answering it somewhat, but for the folks that are maybe watching this later, my boss, Dr. Gary Stratton, the Dean of Arts and Sciences at Johnson University, is asking about how our school and maybe some other Christian schools in the area, because we got a lot of Christian schools here, would go about getting started to do prison education. Where do we start?
Can I say one quick thing about the stigma piece too? Because that's something that we've had to, some people there's fear going in prison, and then some people are questioning why North Park is going inside. And there's so much around that. And one of the things I think it's so important for us to remember is the reasons that people are incarcerated. Some people are incarcerated because they have been part of harming others. Other people are incarcerated because they had bad representation, or they were in the wrong place at the wrong. There's so many reasons, and I think remembering that the people inside, that some of them call us to the work of institutional and social systemic justice, and others bring us to the limits and stretch us to the limits of the redemptive power of the gospel. And so I always remind that there's the edges of justice, and also who can and can't be transformed. This is what this work brings with it. And that leads into education, which, as I said in the chat, is a really effective interrupter of mass incarceration. Dominique said last night, the state saves $5 for every dollar it puts into education, which is representative of people not going back into prison once they've gotten out. There's a wonderful program in California that's been running for over 10 years. And even students who just take a couple courses in this higher ed program, not one of them, of the thousands of students, have gone back to prison for a violent crime, which is a pretty amazing statistic. In terms of getting started, the best way to start is to contact either the chaplain or the warden of programs, or whoever works with volunteers, and ask about the possibility of classes, about the possibility of running. We started by just running not for credit courses, and got a sense of the students, what they wanted and what would be helpful. And I think getting in, or especially if you have a good chaplain, every prison is different. And navigating it, the corrections can be a beast, but if you've got somebody good on the ground that you can get in with, try a class, that's the first way to start. And then the second thing is to get in touch with people who are doing the work and getting advice from them and ideas. But I would love to see that happen in your county, Knox County.
There is also an organization based at Temple University called Inside Out that provides training for faculty. There is a cost associated with it, but it trains faculty to teach in correctional facilities, much the manner that North Park does with outside students and inside students. I'm certified in the Inside Out model. I've been taking Howard students into local jails now for 5 years. Prior to that, I taught in the first seminary program, accredited seminary program, in prison at New York Theological Seminary at Sing Sing prison back in the 90s. So and the other thing I would add is the Second Chance Pell Grant initiative has passed. And so men and women who would be Pell Grant eligible were they not incarcerated are now eligible. Most of them, not all, but most of them are now eligible for Pell Grants while they're in prison, so that it can be financed. The one Christian university I know that is Evangelical Christian University that I know is using that program is Eastern University in Philadelphia. Dr. Kimberly Johnson runs their prison education program at Eastern University.
Awesome. I've got another question from one of our middle school principals here in Knoxville. She's asked this question for both of you. Have either of you found trends for the needs of children of incarcerated individuals? She says, as an educator, I don't often find out they have an incarcerated parent until they have acted out negatively. So any thoughts on ways to intervene or ways to support children of incarcerated folks?
Yeah, the number, there are a number of resources. I'll mention a couple. Because I don't know how old the children are. Sesame Street has a resource page called Little Children Big Big Challenge, something like that. But it's a it had a set. First of all, there is a Sesame Street character. His name is Alex. His father's in prison. Okay, Alex was introduced 2 years ago in a special episode of Sesame Street, and now he's a regular. His father's incarcerated. The episode in which Alex was introduced can be downloaded from the Sesame Street website on the page that they have, resource page they have on incarceration. They have little vignettes where children talk about what it's like to be the child of an incarcerated parent, how they stay in touch with their parent while they're away, how they deal with the grief of that they feel during visitation. All of those resources, I use them in I teach a class on ministry in the criminal justice system at Howard, and we spend a whole unit going through the Sesame Street material, as well as a couple chapters in my book that was mentioned earlier, Ministry with Prisoners and Families from Judson Press. We have 2 chapters there on working with children of the incarcerated. And so it became a very big issue in the Bush administration, and there was dedicated federal funding to build those programs up. Unfortunately, that dedicated federal emphasis was lost during the Obama administration, but the residue is still there and the infrastructure is still there. Amachi Mentoring program based in Philadelphia has trained over 250,000 mentors for children of incarcerated parents as well. So those are just a couple of resources, and I'm sure Dr. Michelle has some as well.
I don't have specific resources as you've listed. I just want to underscore the importance of knowing all of the effects of mass incarceration and who is affected by it. It's not just people locked up. There are a lot of, I know, studies, though, on, this is why we're going into the women's prison, because 60% of the women in Illinois have at least one child at home, if not more. And so these women are locked up, and we know that having their moms studying and in programs will directly and immediately impact children in school. They become exemplars, models, inspirations, as opposed to a source of embarrassment or whatever. So yeah, those effects are really important.
Thanks for those resources. I had one question from one of my students. JaVale asked to Dr. Michelle, what was your motivation for beginning to help people and beginning to help this particular population in particular? Dominique shared the story last night about when he was a undergrad student, and he heard about the story of the 92-year-old woman that was not far from him. And so I would, for either of you, I'd love to hear if there are any stories that kind of got you into this work and kind of started you on this journey.
Well, I mean, I have to say, frankly, Dominique was my student, one of my first students, and his stories and the ways he challenged me to be living what I was teaching was one inspiration for me to think, how can education be more accessible? I think part of it is just my belief that theological education is good for everyone, and it's restorative. It's not just for people who want to be a senior pastor at the church down the street. It's for anyone who wants to engage in ministry. So I think that, along with teaching in Chicago and having my students, and especially my students of color, say, North Park can do more and can be a better institution in this city, and really pushing us for educational access. And I really think it was my students who pushed me. And then the last piece I would say is that I always thought I understood racism because I grew up in poverty. My mom made, well under the poverty line, single mom. And I thought I understood the kind of suffering that's associated with race. And I realized, frankly, too late in life, that these are distinctive systemic forms of injustice, and they're layered, right, in racism. And so coming into my own racial consciousness was another piece, I think, that led me to think about education as a reparative act.
I had three seminal experiences that put me in this direction. First was I went to Paterson, New Jersey in 1977 as a missionary for Youth for Christ. Some of you may be familiar with Campus Life Ministries. I worked for Campus Life, and their juvenile justice division sent me to Paterson to work with court adjudicated youth. And that was my first step in this work. And my second step into it was when I went to New York Seminary as academic dean. Under the master's degree at Sing Sing Prison was in my purview, and so I began teaching there. And then my third motivation was my own incarceration. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I'm allergic to alcohol. When I drink, I break out in handcuffs. And, multiple DUIs landed me in my county jail for a 1 to 2. And so I had firsthand experience on the other side of the bars, not just teaching, but also having been a prisoner myself. So those three experiences propelled me into this space.
Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate you all sharing that. I just want to, we have just a couple minutes before we are going to go into our workshops for this evening. And so I just want to give just a moment to each of you to just share any final closing thoughts you want to share with us or with folks that might view this later on Facebook or what have you. So yeah, I'll start with you, Dr. Trulear, and then we'll close with Dr. Michelle. So.
The only thing I would say in closing is that something that I said during my presentation, this affects all of us. And one of the reasons that I mentioned my own incarceration, which is what I would have mentioned anyway as part of the closing, or my inmate number 100002648, is because that's a stigma buster. That's a shame buster. And so one of the things that those of us who have criminal records or criminal histories have to do is we have to be willing to put ourselves into, make our voices heard, because those of us who are closest to the problem, I believe, are also close to the solution. And we also have the capacity to create space for other people to come forward and for those that are dealing with the shame and stigma to know that they're not alone in this space of having been incarcerated or somehow tied to the criminal justice system in this country. And one other quick thing. I'm not a prison abolitionist like Dr. Michelle, though I respect them greatly. But here's what I will say. For me, we will see real reform when prison is the alternative rather than we have alternatives to prison. So prison is an alternative rather than being the norm and we have alternatives to prison. That's my vision for reform. I do salute the abolitionists. We need their voices.
Thank you for that point, sir. It reminds me of the quote of Angela Davis when she says that we lock people up in prison in the false hopes of locking up the social problems that they represent.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate your comment, and I think the last thing I think I would say goes back to what I was saying when I conflated poverty and race, and that is that while they are not the same, and it's really important to be able to name the distinctiveness of oppressive systems and struggles and the distinctive ways that people suffer within them, they are also points of access into another's humanity. And so suffering is a point of access, and so I guess that's what we're called to do as Christians, to have, I don't know, did you say enfranchised grief, Dr. T? I know it's disenfranchised. What's the alternative? Shared grief, that we find ourselves and one another in solidarity, and prison and those who are incarcerated are an important, powerful witness of the church for people who are free to be in solidarity with our brothers and sisters inside. So, thank you.